Hello, welcome to the Movies That Made Me. I am your host, Luke Sorba, and this time the theme is love. Ever since William Hisey directed The Kiss for Edison Pictures in 1896, there have been movies about love. Different types of love, including love of an animal in Kes by Ken Loach, love of a place in Time and the City by Terence Davies, which is about his beloved Liverpool, love of food in Marco Ferreri's La Grande Abbuffata. But I'm going to concentrate on films about romantic love. But even there are so many great examples across the spectrum of love. Love across the classes in Romuald et Juliette, directed by Colleen Serrault. There is love across race in Rainer Werner Fassbinder's Fear Eats the Soul, across generations in Hal Ashby's unique Harold and Maude, in defiance of heterosexual norms in Ang Lee's Brokeback Mountain and Celine Sciamma's Portrait of a Lady on Fire. My guests today have much in common, but one of the things I can say is that I love their company and I love their work. And they are writer, director, and Los Angeles doyen of improvisation, Dan O'Connor. And I cannot remember the last time I was able to use the word doyen, but you are one, Dan. And filmmaker and currently BBC television drama script editor, Martha Julia. Thank you for joining me. It's evening, a Sunday evening in the UK. It's the afternoon in Texas, but the magic of this technology has enabled us to come together. I found it difficult to narrow my choices down to two movies. That's what I asked my guests to do. Two movies that fall in this category. I'm going to ask you, before you introduce your movies and maybe a little bit about what you're up to, which movies did you consider but that didn't quite make the grade? So I've mentioned some in my introduction. I would have been very happy to put in my two favorite movies about love, but they aren't there. Dan, can I start with you? A movie that you considered but you're not actually putting on the table today?
Well, you mentioned it before we got on the pod, which is Big Night, the movie with Stanley Tucci and Tony Shalhoub and Minnie Driver and Ian Holm. I mean, it's got a fantastic cast, and it's about love, and it's about familial love, and it's about love of food in a way that is pretty amazing. So that would have been in my top five with regard to this category.
Martha, a movie that you considered but didn't squeak through.
I first interpreted the theme of love as the sweeping melodrama. That's where it took me first of all. So I was thinking of Todd Haynes' Carol, which was just an absolute wonderful film and intensely romantic. And then I started wondering if actually Far From Heaven was my preferred film as the final piece. And then I started thinking about Douglas Sirk's films, because I was like, well, actually, they're an extension of these, and these were the ones that came first. So I started going to Imitation of Life. And then I actually just had to stop, because once you hit that first domino, there's actually no stopping. And I realized that I actually do really love romantic films. Although sometimes I don't always think there's a genre that I'm drawn to, but loads of my favorite films fit under this quite broad category.
Well, it's interesting, the use of genre, because I think some of the films that we have chosen would be placed by sort of movie list makers into different genres, even though they contain love, because of course the rom-com is not the only sort of vehicle to put love on the screen. Let's crack on. Dan, can I start with you? You have two, in no particular order. Which one would you like to pitch to us as a movie that contains love? Tell us a little bit about the movie, and then if you would, why it resonates with you as an individual.
Well, the first one I want to talk about, and by the way, I was the Woman on Fire and Carol both are. That's the great thing about this conversation is the more other people mention film, the more excited you get to talk about film. Because I love both of those films so much. But It's a Wonderful Life is the one of the films I wanted to talk about today. And the reason why I'm drawn to it is because even though I've been watching it probably over 50 years, I still am amazed by it. I mean, not only do I weep in the places where you should cry, but I'm just moved by the story. I'm moved by the honesty of it, and the performances are great. You know, Frank Capra's kind of weird little rep company of folks, and the fact that as every year that I've watched it, I've learned a little bit more about it. And I think probably about, I don't know, 15 years ago or something, I learned that it was Stewart's first movie after the war. And one of the reasons why he is so raw in it is because it's his first thing after going through the war. And I found out only today in getting ready to talk to you and Martha that it was Capra's first movie after the war. So both of them were, you know, frayed nerves and really uncertain, and that shows. And the little bit of trivia is there were a couple of things that were maybe done for the first time in this film, but the scene in the bar where he's having the breakdown and praying to God, Capra liked very much, but he was shooting a master at that point. And so he tried to get Stewart to give that performance again, and Stewart couldn't quite get there. So maybe for the first time, he pushed in on the frame, which is why it's grainier than the stuff before and after it. Now with 4K, you could totally push in and it would be no problem. You wouldn't lose anything. But that one take was the one he wanted, and so he kept it. And the other thing is they won an award because they created fake snow for the first time that didn't interfere with the sound, because I think before it was like cornflakes or something like that. I mean, it's a massive set. It was 3 real city blocks long. But as far as our theme today, the love of his personal desire, I guess, to want to travel and things like that, is this pull of wanting to get out of there, but also understanding that he had a responsibility for his family and the love of his family. That's one thing. Also, throughout it, you really see the familial love, like between him and his mom. And that woman played Stewart's mom 5 times in 5 different movies. And she's just terrific. And that's, you know, her performance is something that I was watching this time around, watching it this year. There were a few things where, you know, zoomed in, but the love between him and his brother, the love between him and his uncle, his, you know, horribly inefficient and quasi-dangerous uncle, all of that stuff, and the love between him and the Donna Reed's character is just so palpable. It's so genuine. There's also a bit of improv in it that I wanted to point out before I forget, which I didn't know, which was in the scene where Uncle Billy is drunk and George sends him home. He points him in one direction and then he walks the other direction or something like that. He walks out of frame and I think Stewart lights a cigarette or something like that, but he's there for a second. Then you hear this loud crash off screen. And then you hear the Uncle Billy go, "I'm all right. I'm all right." And I always thought that was written. I thought that was a bit. And it was improvised because a stagehand had a big tray of something off screen and dropped it. And Thomas Mitchell improvised the line.
That's very funny, Dan, because they've mastered silent snow, but they can't stop a stagehand dropping a tray full of props, causing a massive clatter. But they've solved that by including it. And it is in the spirit of the movie, which is what I think you're implying, that kind of positivity, that rather than get annoyed, Christian Bale style, with a noisy, lighting crew member, it's I will embrace it. May I ask, before I bring Martha in, the familial love that you've detailed that Jimmy Stewart's character George has, it's wider. It's his love of the whole community, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the community that pays him back with love. And he doesn't know the love is, he doesn't believe the love is there, which is why he wants to take his life, because he's let everyone down. And they have to tell him, love is unconditional. We love you when you're in trouble. In a way, that's a test of our love. And for me, that's, I mean, it always brings tears to my eyes, but that happens very easily in the cinema. Maybe it's because it's dark. So Martha, how do, Dan and myself are of a generation where we've seen this many times. What about you? Does it as a millennial? That's not the only reason you're here. You're not speaking on behalf of the millennial cohort. Does it speak to you though? Does it speak to you? This
It's a Wonderful Life, or generally those themes?
It's a Wonderful Life. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I do remember it quite well, but I haven't actually seen it in a very long time. It wasn't one of my Christmas movies that we put on so regularly, so I couldn't say about how much it makes me feel as the kind of like routine thing that I would see every year. But I do think that it's quite sweeping. I really like old films as well, so I do think that I do get quite whisked away by some of their themes, which tend to be particularly post-war, about these small communities banding together and overcoming some sort of external issue that's actually an internal obstacle. So I do really enjoy that.
But I think he does marry that together so well. And we remember those rep companies, those ensemblers. If you think You Can't Take It With You, those marvelous performances. And you do get this feeling. And I would say you get it in an improv company as well, that you're a kind of family. You don't quite know what you're going to do, but you're going to have each other's backs, and it's going to work out, and you trust in each other. And you see that in the characters that he creates in these kind of affectionate networks, which is part of what Capra-esque means. I think it's not sentimental, but I think it's emotional. It's affectionate.
It's individual. I think in terms of the fact that it's a story about a person. It's a story, that all of his stuff. And you think about Mr. Deeds Goes to Town and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. It's about the individual and how can they overcome the machine, or how can they overcome bureaucracy and graft and what have you. So there's a love of justice, without sounding too pretentious. There's a love of what's right.
Absolutely. And I do feel those individuals are there for the rest of us. So when we as an audience we want Mr. Smith, Mr. Deeds, George to be redeemed, to succeed, kind of on our behalf, as much as we love them as the individual characters, and we love Gary Cooper and we love James Stewart, they are also advocates for our better natures, for the qualities that our best selves admire, like justice.
There's something other factoid that I think is important about that movie is, like, Dalton Trumbo, Dorothy Parker, and Clifford Odets all wrote on it.
Wow.
And I think the FBI, and maybe, I don't know if this is before the House Un-American Committee or whatever, but I know the FBI thought it might be communist because it makes fun of bankers. And I just love the fact that sweet, honest movie, or it feels like it, was considered possible communist propaganda.
Yes, for me, it's the most wholesome side of Americana. But I could, the idea is un-American, because within international cinema, I feel this is, whatever this means, a very American film.
Yeah.
I think it has very American tropes about the small town, about the individual, that reads to me as very much part of that American cultural tradition, which I love. I love Hollywood, Hollywood movies, even though I'm outside of it. Let's go to Martha's first of your two.
Okay,
What are you going to treat us to?
I know, I'm trying to think which one to do first. I might go chronologically and go for My Beautiful Laundrette, which is 1985, Stephen Frears. And I think it actually does, well, when I was rewatching it, because I was rewatching it in preparation to talk about it here today, and I was trying to kind of identify what it was that I love so much about it and why it makes me feel so happy. I also noticed this when I was choosing my films, that the romantic films that I was drawn to are all have happy endings, which is ironic because I think that a great romance has to end in tragedy, but it seems that I can't stop watching these ones that give me joy. And My Beautiful Laundrette is definitely probably at the top there. So it takes us to Thatcher's Britain and quite dire circumstances, and it manages to sew together a group of individuals that are struggling because of their class, race, sexuality, gender, because you have the character of Omar's cousin Tanya, who's also struggling against the sexism of her family, and it manages to sew together this group of outsiders just triumphing by banding together and being outsiders together. And I think they managed to, it's just a very compassionate film. And I think that's what I love about it so much, is that it doesn't judge anyone, even the fascists. Well, it does a bit, but there is redemption for everyone. There's, the uncle's mistress, which is traditionally, a negative stereotype. And, she talks about her lack of options and her class, but also the fact that she's very loving to the uncle, and that has an effect to the whole family because he's happier as well, and he's also kind of trapped in this system that they're all in as well, and everyone's kind of not in control of their circumstances but doing their best. And I think that's why it makes me so happy. And seeing Omar and Johnny's relationship, which is the main love affair of the story, and they're turning this laundrette around and also turning their lives around and building this kind of utopia, and coming over their differences, and it's got a happy ending, and I'm a sucker for that. So
you have Martha, you have the British Pakistani family with their own code, their own rules that some are more comfortable within, that you've identified, and you have unemployed white working class of whom Johnny is a member. And at the start, they are absolutely antagonists, violent antagonists. There's that undercurrent. Well, actually, it's quite explicit, the racism that's present there. But as you say, it's a forgiving film. It's put together by Hanif Qureshi and Stephen Frears. So you have someone of a British Asian heritage, and you also have a white filmmaker who've come together to make this film. And there is the baddie is redeemed, as you say. The outsider, who could be seen as the person that comes in and destroys the family, is cast in a positive light. It is remarkably, as you say, sympathetic in a decade of selfishness and materialism that's absent in that film. Do you remember the film, Dan?
I've never seen the film. I've never seen the film. I think I lived it, but no. But I was thinking about living in the UK at that time, and my roommates getting drunk and singing that they were all going to die because they were going to get drafted to go fight Argentina. Yeah, I'm a sucker for redemption and for happy endings. So Martha, I love the idea of being in love with movies that have happy endings. It's hard to watch, like Les Liaisons Dangereuses is something that I thought about, but I could never watch that. I think I've watched it twice in my whole life. I don't think I could watch it again.
I know exactly what you mean. Some of my
painful.
favorite films, I think I've actually seen once.
Yeah.
And I'm not revisiting them.
It's just too much. You've had that experience as opposed to the sugar or cocaine effect of a happy ending.
There's suffering in it, though. There is suffering in it.
Yes.
I was revisiting it, and the film ends with Omar and Johnny literally tending each other's wounds, doesn't it,
Yeah.
after a big fight?
Yeah, so it's not an easy ride, and that's also what I mean about it being compassionate, because it doesn't paint everyone in a good light. I don't mean that way at all. It shows intense hardship, and there is racial slurs. Johnny uses racial slurs, even though he's the love interest, and as we say, painted in a positive light. There's violence, but it's also got comic moments and light relief. It is, I would probably say you could classify it as a comedy as well. So you've got these like fascists that are hanging outside the laundrette, and then there's this really comic moment where Johnny gets them to help them put the laundrette light up, sign up, and it's this amazing moment. So these people, but then those are the people that at the end, there's a violent confrontation outside of the laundrette, and they beat the bum, and at the end they're inside kind of having refuge in the laundrette. And it's like a kind of bittersweet ending, because they have each other, they have the laundrette, they have a new society and a home, but the problems aren't over, which I think is really important to reflect in Thatcher's Britain, because obviously they weren't.
Absolutely. It does feel like it's a refuge, a sanctuary, but there's still all the shit going on outside. Yeah. And but it's clever enough to get to represent the working class white far right as themselves a symptom of a deeper problem.
Yes.
Their dispossession, their alienation. And I think it's just so sophisticated. And yet also you can just see it as this beautiful love story between these two people from different communities who, despite all the social, religious architecture acting against them, find each other. Dan, did you want to say something?
Well, I was just wondering if the two of you agree with my massively generalized statement that I'm going to make, which is I think that filmmaking used to be a response to the time rather than an echoing of the time, because I think there were a lot of great films that tried to respond to Thatcher's England, to the evils of the House Un-American Committee, to fascism during World War II or leading up to World War II. And it feels like now that there's mostly sort of, I think maybe in American culture, we're leaning into fear, we're leaning into, darkness, and rather than a response of hope. But I mean, that's how I'm feeling today. I could change my mind tomorrow, but.
I mean, it's a big question. It's so much easier to look back and understand the 80s than today. So what you say about today will become clear in a few years' time, won't it, when we look back? But I remember going to the cinema and seeing these little pearls of independent British filmmaking that was against the grain of society, and feeling kind of reinvigorated in those moments when I sat in the Ritzy Cinema in Brixton. And then I'm out and I'm back in the struggle at work, struggle with my trade union, and an ally to others suffering far greater than me. I think you're absolutely right in the role, and I'm sure other cultural forms as well, that cinema does in responding to and helping us escape from and see differently than what the hegemony is at the time, and going, no, there's a different way forward, there's a different way of being. Yeah. It's in this film, it's here for the few hours. If it changes you a little bit when you leave the cinema, great, but if it doesn't, you've still got this.
It is kind of echoing the time, but also providing those moments of hope that you need during that time. So in that way, I would say it's definitely a response to the time. My Beautiful Laundrette specifically, but yeah, films like that.
I can't wait to watch it now. I'm very excited.
Dan, back to you. I know what your next choice is. It's my favourite film. So, but you get to talk about it, and I get
no
to
pressure.
So I'd love your take on this movie. I love talking about it, reading about it.
So Luke Sorba's favorite film is Casablanca, and I think it's my favorite film as well. It is so well written and so well directed, and I did a deep dive on Michael Curtiz's in getting ready for today, and found out he directed all of the Errol Flynn movies that I love and that were my favorite movies as a kid. I think I've seen Adventures of Robin Hood probably 30 or 40 times, and to turn me on also to the great composers of the time, like Max Steiner, who did a lot of the Warner Brothers scoring, just amazing. But to talk about Casablanca, I mean, such amazing love. I don't know if noble love. I don't think it's noble love. I'm not articulate enough to describe it. But the fact that he makes that choice at the end is so amazing and so loving when you think about it. And one of the factoids that Michael Curtiz spoke 5 languages, none of them well. I think that was a quote because he was Hungarian. But when Ingrid Bergman asked him, who do I really love? Do I love Victor Laszlo, or do I like Richard Blaine? Do I love Richard Blaine? And he basically gave her an answer that was both. So she does a great job of balancing the affection for both those guys, and it's beautiful. And she's a terrific actor. They're all 3 of them. Everybody in the movie is terrific.
Everybody. The smaller parts shine one after the other. The cameos, everyone, the waiter, the singer, everyone. I will add at this point, one interesting thing about the cast I found is how many of them were from European emigre backgrounds. They had fled fascism and Nazism that was spreading all over Europe. And so the movie is like Casablanca itself, a refuge, but also in a way a prison where people have unwillingly had to flee to. And they've made this film, this extraordinary film, because of the alchemy between all the creative, the Epsteins, who the brothers who wrote most of the script, the director, the cast, they align. I'm getting very pretentious here, but when they do align, we notice.
I love it. All but 4 of them were not born. Only 4 people were Americans.
Wow, right.
And Curtiz himself lost his parents and his sister at Auschwitz. Carl, the waiter, lost his family in the camps. The girl that the character Yvonne and the bartender were actually a couple, were a real couple. But the also the double entendre and Claude Rains in amazing job. But there are a number of times where they're getting away with sex jokes that they probably shouldn't be getting away with. They're delivered beautifully. Like at one point, the young girl, the Bulgarian, or I can't remember, that who's looking for the papers, and she says, Bogart says, so you and your husband? She says, yes. He goes, oh, he's getting more broad-minded, talking about Claude Rains. And there's so many moments like that where the writing, and of course when everyone sings Les Marseillaise, I can never pronounce it correctly, but it's so amazingly, it's inspiring in a way that like you hope film can do, and it's such a great example.
That moment is wonderful, and I remember Madeleine LeBeau plays Yvonne. She gets a close-up during the singing of the Madeleine of the Marseillaise.
Yeah,
so she's got a peripheral character. She gets her moment. Everyone gets their moment.
Yeah,
yes, it's such a humanist piece, isn't it, Dan? And we marvel at the writing, because this is a commercial Hollywood movie, and we forget that some of the finest and most literate artists gravitated towards Hollywood from all over the world, particularly from Europe. We should not be surprised at the wit and the wisdom contained within these movies that had to pass through the producers' commercial filter, but they managed to, in so many cases, just elevate the genre within those constraints. It's just fantastic. And let's talk about the sacrifice. Martha, we are men, and it is a man who
Really?
So we're men. So I can't help imagining myself as Rick and having to make that decision and hoping I would be the noble one and I would sacrifice for the good of the world my personal happiness. You might see, I don't know, but you might see it through Ilsa's eyes. And I'm just wondering how that famous ending, when he hands over the tickets and he does his speech, you mentioned the word noble. Of course it's noble, Dan. It's written in the script. He denies being noble. Like you just said, you yourself, you were saying, you know, you're not good at being noble, but you're being like Rick Blaine. He said, I'm no good at being noble, but I think you are, and he is. How does it feel to you, Marty?
I absolutely love this film. And yes, it's one of those films where you're getting to the end and it could not end any other way. And yet every time I find myself wanting it to, but also knowing that I don't even want what I want, because then Rick wouldn't be Rick if he didn't let her get on the plane. So it's really hard. And also yeah, you're right. I mean, it's hard. I see it from both of their perspectives, and I think it's perfect. But I think also what's interesting is that it's not just his sacrifice, because although she loves them both, she's also making a sacrifice, because we all know that if it wasn't for the war, she wouldn't get on the plane.
Absolutely.
But she's making as much of a sacrifice because she knows that her function here is to leave and be by his side. And it's so painful and yet so perfect. I think actually I watched that the last time about 10 years ago, and I cried so much at the end that I was like, I forgot how sad it was. Because it's so romantic and sweeping, and you just get really lost in it, and then you just kind of I always get a bit like punched in the face by the end because I forget how emotionally moving it is.
I would hope to write a film someday that makes everybody on the cast, whether they have one line or, whether they're a star, equal in some ways. Because like you were talking about her close-up, but, even the guy who's playing the casino manager for him is terrific. Everybody is terrific. And everybody has a line that lets you know who they are. Even Berger, the Norwegian underground guy, is fully realized. Everybody, even if they only have 2 or 3 lines. Like, as a writer, I marvel at the fact that everybody is of equal weight, and that's impossible to do. I mean, that there's of course, casting is a huge part of that, but it feels like everybody's important, everybody's involved. Even people who have 2 lines are fantastic.
I think you're spot on, and it's the theme, because it's a humanist anti-fascist film. That reflects the greater theme of the movie, that every individual matters in this world. If a movie can be an individual story that you are so bought into, but at the same time shine a light on the wider social issues, it's achieved a great and rare thing. And Casablanca certainly does.
Two little factoids.
Go on. Yes, I love your factoids.
I love them.
Yeah.
One was that Bogart literally says, "I don't do love well." He said, and Michael Curtiz had to convince him that he was a romantic lead. He did not believe he was a romantic lead. And I love the stuff in Paris. I think he plays it wonderfully, and you can see the love that's going on there, and so he does a great job. Maybe he was put off by the fact that Bergman, I think, is 2 inches taller than him, but the other factoid is that Bergman and Bogart didn't really hang out very much during the filming. The only time they got together was a couple weeks in, where they were both like, "We got to get off this film. It's not very good." They were both worried that it was not working. And so they had a lunch and were trying to figure out how to skate. And thank God they didn't.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
Wow. I thought you were gonna say, I'll say it, thank goodness the first choice wasn't available. George Raft. I like George Raft in George Raft movies. I've seen a lot of those 30s movies. It tends to be gangster movies. and I've enjoyed him in them. But thank God it wasn't him. And perhaps it is Bogart's awkwardness with expressing love that some of us relate to, because love can make you really tongue-tied, and it can make it really difficult for you to voice those feelings. And maybe that comes out in this performance, and we actually relate to that awkwardness. Who knows?
So my second film, I'd say, is very different to Casablanca. And it's also, I find it has many similarities with my other favorite film, which is unsurprising, My Beautiful Laundrette, but also many differences. And it is Strictly Ballroom, which I believe was 1992, Baz Luhrmann's film. And it was the first of his amazingly accurately titled Red Curtain trilogy. And unlike My Beautiful Laundrette, which is set in gritty Thatcher's Britain, we are in this magical world in Australia of ballroom dancing, where everything is heightened, from costume, performances, dialogue, just completely the aesthetics themselves. And it's the story of Scott, who's a ballroom dancer brought up by championship ballroom dancers in the ballroom dancing world, but he wants to dance his own steps because he wants to express himself through dance in a more accurate way. And that is honestly the simple premise, which sounds so bizarre when you lay it out. And yet it's just the most magical movie about, again, outsiders. And he meets this like quiet girl, Fran, who's the only person that agrees to dance his own steps with him, and they start training at nighttime. And it's quite farcical, it's a great comedy. But also I think what's really surprising, when you get about half an hour in, and then suddenly it starts developing this serious romance and like serious pathos in their relationship. Eventually, as I mentioned earlier, they get to dance their own steps, and there's a happy ending. But along the way, they have it's quite a journey involving breaking out from your parents' kind of control or their expectations of what you want to be. There's like I say, being different. She's very different from the other girls, and at the end, and they're kind of they spent the whole film hiding, practicing behind it at night. And then they have this great moment in the championships where they dance in front of an entire crowd and are celebrated for their difference. And it's a really wonderful film full of hilarious characters. It's also very compassionate, even to the villains, who are the ballroom king, Barry Fife, who says, "You can't dance your own steps, Scott." And it's just wonderful. It's just really joyous. And I watched it, the last time I watched this film was actually this year in March, when I actually had COVID. And so me and my flatmates, who all had it, chose a film a night, and that was mine. And I didn't know if it was going to go down well, because it's quite obscure. It's a strange film, and they absolutely loved it. And it just made me think of what it could literally appeal to anyone.
I love the movie. I'm so glad Martha picked it. Yes, it's very endearing and very honest. It doesn't sort of apologize for itself. And I just love hearing "Paso Doble" in a broad Australian accent. Yeah, Scott, you can't dance at Paso Doble. And then the subculture thing, like she's related to, I can't remember, but they're Spanish immigrants.
Their Spanish heritage as well.
Yeah.
Was a big part of it.
But yeah, it's fantastic. And I don't know, he gets away with such amazingly broad characters in such an honest way. Like, you go in and somebody else handling that character, it would be a clown show. But for whatever reason, like the mom, I just remember all the mascara and people crying, and everybody looked like clowns. But it's a great film, and everybody is 100% committed to it. And I think that's
how he gets away with it.
Yeah, that's why.
That's how he gets away with it, because they're not put up for us to laugh at. because the
No.
performances are by people who believe, I think they believe in who they're playing, and I'm drawn in, and I just end up accepting them all, even though you look back and you think, absolutely, it could be seen as a freak show, but it's not. It's not. Also, we know these subcultures are real. I think I'm a member of one of these subcultures, and of eccentric, geeky Dungeons and Dragons playing, comic strip reading. In a way, I've got at least a foot in a subculture, and hell, they're allowed to love too. And I thank you for picking out there's the social differences, like in West Side Story. So it's no surprise that Baz Luhrmann went on to make Romeo plus Juliet, which has some similar tropes. It also has a kind of mousy female lead. How often do we see a kind of mousy female lead who doesn't then magically turn out to be someone who's been, some beautiful glamorous actress who's actually being sort of playing down?
Sandra Bullock after she stops wearing the glasses.
Exactly. She doesn't turn into a swan. She remains who she is. And also his love of ballroom dancing would turn a lot of heads in kind of the virile Australian world of sort of young men. It's also the only film that is about young love that we've chosen tonight. So I'm really pleased it's there. And quite frankly, that dance to Cyndi Lauper's Time After Time is heartbreakingly romantic, and I love it.
There's a beautiful moment where they dance to it in front of the Coca-Cola sign on a roof. That's where they first dance it, and it's the moment where I think the film elevates to a point where you're just so emotionally connected, and you're no longer just watching it as a comedy. But I was so supportive of them. I was like, I'm in this now.
Otherwise, in our closing moments, I'm going to sprinkle a couple of more titles. They are, because I get to do my two, I've picked a film that was made in the same year, I think, as It's a Wonderful Life, which is Jean Cocteau's version of the Beauty and the Beast fairy tale, La Belle et la Bête. I was so moved because I didn't know the story. And not only is there the sacrifice that Belle makes for her father, so there is filial love within the story. She allows herself to be imprisoned by the beast in order to release her father because he's accidentally plucked a rose. But clearly we start to fall in love with the beast, La Bête, just as she does. And yet, without going into the intricacies of the plot, he dies. He dies when a mirror is broken. And when the beast dies in her arm, I started sobbing because that was it. I didn't realize, in fact, in the story, when the Gaston character, who's actually called Avenant in this version, but basically the swaggering, bullying male, in this movie, he's killed. Diana, the goddess, who's a statue in the movie, comes to life. He shoots him with an arrow. And he dies, and then he becomes the new beast, and the curse is lifted. And the beast, who's dead in the arms of Belle, comes back to life as this beautiful prince. For me, that was my, I'd resigned myself to this being one of those tragic love story that Martha says she prefers avoiding, she likes to have. So it had those two moments for me of utter, I was bereft that they couldn't find each other, that the obstacles, they weren't going to overcome them, because he's a monstrous figure and she's this beautiful girl from a different world. He's trapped in this palace, and then they do. But I will add something to it, which is, as a teenage boy, I felt very much an outsider, very unattractive, very no one understands me, and I identified with the beast, and I think a lot of awkward teenage boys do, and that is, I think, it's one of the reasons it still resonates with me, because you're kind of wishing at that age, if only someone could see inside me. As a teenager, I didn't have these words. There's something beautiful that I think could be loved. And I think that story will always resonate, particularly for people who feel that there's a disguise has been put on them and that's why the Disney cartoon was so fantastic, and then the live action remake, and now there's a pantomime of it, and it's a story that will always be told.
Endless.
I don't know whether you remember the original or you've seen the Disney version, but your comments on any of those versions would be welcome.
Oh yeah, no, that was obviously one of my, well, as you were revealed as my father, so you know that was my favorite cartoon as a child. But I did not know that was your one of your favorite romance films, shall we call it? And I've actually not seen it, so I feel like I definitely need to watch that, especially as I love the story. But I completely agree. I think that it holds loads of the same themes, which is about feeling different and feeling not noticed, and then one person noticing you essentially, and then transforming you, which is an endless tale, and one I will keep watching because it's got a happy ending.
There is literally a key that she finds that's one of the plot affects the plot. Dan, any of the versions?
I love the story, and I love the sacrifice. I don't know why I'm equating. Well, they must really be in love if they're willing to sacrifice something. But I'm actually kind of, as you're talking, Luke, I'm thinking about BFI, because the British Film Institute on the South Bank. I don't know if it's still there.
It's still there.
It is.
I still go.
So when I was eating Campbell's soup and Brussels sprouts, I still would go and see Seven Samurai, the Philadelphia Story.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I went as often as I could.
I was there.
You know, I went, and so I'm just advocating for seeing. There is something about the shared experience. Not that I don't enjoy watching a DVD or stream at home, but there is something about the collective experience of something like that. I mean, I went to the same cinema to see Young Frankenstein 7 times when I was a kid because I couldn't believe that anything could be that funny. But I haven't seen that version, so now I want to see that version, like Martha.
Okay, my final film. All right, this is a pause. This might not make the podcast, but I've got to tell Dan this anecdote. I'm sorry if I'm keeping you. I used to go to the National Film Theatre, as the BFI used to be called, had no money, and I would queue. I never booked. I would queue for the reserved seats reserved for people who queued. I didn't book when I was a teenager and 20 plus, and they were cheap and they were available if you got there an hour and a half early and stood in the rain. And I did. And I got to see, as a result of that queuing, and I think we were the last two who were let in, my friend and my oldest friend, Nick, and myself. I think we were the last two. The British premiere of Young Frankenstein. And Dan, let me tell you who was in the audience, because you are now going to go, oh my dear. Mel Brooks, Dom DeLuise, Peter Boyle. Gene Wilder wasn't there. Peter Boyle, and I think Madeleine Kahn. But Mel took to the stage and did a Q&A. 2 or 3 of the other actors did. And I thought, this movie was fantastic. I cannot believe these people are here, because it's not a red carpet thing. I cannot believe it, because The Producers is my favorite comedy of all time. And it is the first film I literally slid out of my chair watching at the National Film Theatre at a late night, 11 o'clock on my own. But as the Q&A draws to a finish, a woman seated 6 feet in front of me says, Mel, it's time to go. It's flipping Anne Bancroft, his wife, sitting in the audience, and her job was to tell him, because he can, like me, he'll talk forever, when it's time to go. I treasure that memory like no other movie memory. Okay, that has nothing to do with what we're saying tonight. My final film, I'll speak briefly on it because we're running out of time, is Before Sunrise.
Aww.
It's Richard Linklater. It's Jesse and Celine, played by Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy, who meet by chance on a train and have to spend the night walking through Vienna before they wait for him to connect to another train that takes him on his journey back to America. I'll be quite personal with you. I've never fallen in love at first sight. I have fallen in love after talking to someone. And this movie has 2 characters who talk themselves into love with each other. through everything that is revealed, through honest, from the heart, one-on-one, face-to-face talk. But the ending is so romantic. They need to part. He has to return to the USA. She's on her way, I think, to Paris. Could be wrong. But they agree, look, if it's real what we're feeling, let's meet again 6 months from now on a railway platform in Paris. If you're there and I'm there, we know it's real. And the film ends and you don't know whether they do that or not. In the sequel, Before Sunset, you find out the answer to that question. I'm not going to reveal it at the podcast, but
No spoilers.
Dan, meet me on the platform at a Paris train station. If you love me. What is that a reference to? Casablanca. We know that Ilsa wasn't there when Rick turned up in Casablanca, but if you want to find out whether Jesse or Celine, either or both, were there, you have to watch the sequel, Before Sunset. And I'll leave it there, but I'd love to hear your comments, if you have any, on that movie.
Well, you know, I haven't seen any of those. There's 3 of them, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
There are now, yeah.
Okay, so I know what I'm doing this week. I haven't seen them. I've just heard of them. And when I was living in the UK, when I was living in London, I had a very similar experience doing the boat train to Paris overnight.
Wow.
And by the time
you got talking.
We got talking on,
Yes.
I was asleep on we actually met on the ferry and we got talking. She woke me up to make me move so she could sit next to me. And we started talking and we were talking. And then we got off the boat and got on the train and we're talking. And then we went to the end of the compartment and made out. And by the time we got to Paris in the morning, we were completely, utterly smitten, but we went opposite ways and there was no phones or anything like that. We wrote to each other for a little bit, but
Wow.
yeah. Anyway, that's completely off the subject.
You lived it. Did you tell
yeah.
Richard Linklater that story? Because I think he owes you some money.
Yes, he cribbed it. Yeah. Have you seen it, Martha?
Yeah, I love it. I do find it quite funny because I came to it when they'd already made the sequel. So when I came to it, it was already iconic. So I didn't see it in the cinema like some people. But so when I was coming to it, I remember being told, you either love the first one or the second one because they're both excellent. And I remember, have you heard this as well? No, but anyway, I was told young people prefer the first one because it's more kind of, I don't know, it's just really hopeful and they just meet and they fall in love, they've got no issues. And then the second one meets them. Is it 10 years later? I think along the period
they made
passed.
it 9. I think maybe maybe nine years later.
And the characters move on as they would have 9 years, 10 years, decade later. And so it does feel like it's just very different. The tone is different, but it's also wonderful. So I did, I watched the first one and I do think it's my favorite. I watched the third one and I wasn't quite prepared.
Well, the third one is about having been married for a long time. So maybe that's
because I haven't been.
You can watch
I've got that. Hopefully I haven't got that.
Yeah, watch it in a few years' time. I'm going to do that old. I saw it in the cinema, but that meant that I got to live the same number of years between the films that the characters did, who are similar in age to me, which means it has a particular resonance. Our lives haven't turned out the same way, but you are sort of growing up with them. Here's a bit of trivia. The movie is set on June 16th, which is known as Bloomsday, because it is the day in James Joyce's Ulysses that his character spends walking through Dublin. And so there's this literary reference to that wonderful book. Now, James Joyce found a great difficulty in having Ulysses published. It was considered pornographic. It was published by an obscure French-based bookshop that was also a small publishing house called Shakespeare & Co. in Paris. The opening scene of Before Sunset is set in Shakespeare and Co., the real Shakespeare and Co. in Paris, where one of the characters has now become a novelist and is doing a reading of that book. So there's some trivia.
Another factoid.
Really isn't necessary to enhance your enjoyment of but I had to tell someone, and you're here. We are at the end of our time. I have loved talking about movies, talking about love with the two of you. Thank you very much for your choices and the opportunities it's given me to chat, for your insights, for the all the kind of information around those movies I always find absolutely fascinating that you've brought to me, and we are going to broadcast to anyone who's interested in movies and in particular the movies that have somehow stayed with or shaped or done something or made them feel something, my guests. And today they have been Martha Julia and Dan O'Connor. Thank you for your time. My name is Luke Sorba. That was The Movies That Made Me. The producer is Andrew Payne, and it is a Pickard production.